Welcome to the program. Yesterday, an interview that Tucker Carlson did while he was in Russia was released. It was about 20 minutes, and I applaud everyone for having a conversation. Tucker has said many times it's important to see and understand how our adversaries view us. Well, that wasn't clear in this. He just diagnosed a problem, as Aleksandr Dugin always does, and enough to open a door to people, have people say, oh, well, I think I might agree with that. It is really important what Tucker has begun. We have to now continue that conversation so people on our side will not fall victim to this guy. They talked about how his books, people want his books to be banned. I don't. I want you to read him in his own words. There will be stuff at the beginning of the book you'll go, yeah, he knows me. And then by the time you're at the end of the book, you're like, this is a horror show, literally a horror show. But you should read him. Jefferson, when we went into our first foreign war, which was against the Muslim pirates, insisted that everybody read the Quran. If you really want to understand the absurdity of it all, he said, you need to read this in their own words. Now let's get down to it. So let me play just a little bit of what he said to Tucker yesterday, and we'll start there. Here's a clip from the Tucker Carlson interview with Aleksandr Dugin.
And after the fall of the Soviet Union, there was only liberalism. And Francis Fukuyama has pointed out correctly that there are no more any ideologies except of liberalism. And liberalism, that was liberation of this individual from any kind of collective identity. There were only two collective identities to liberate from. Gender identity, because it is collective identity. You are man or woman collectively, so you could not be alone. So liberation from gender, and that has led to transgenders, to LGBT, and new form of sexual individualism. So sex is something optional. And that was not just deviation of liberalism. That was necessarily elements of implementation and the victory of this liberal ideology. And the last step that is not yet totally made is liberation from human identity, humanity optional. And when now we are choosing, or you in the West, you are choosing the sex you want, as you want. And the last step in this process of liberalism, implementation of liberalism, will mean precisely the human optional. So you can choose your individual identity to be human, not to be human. And that has a name: transhumanism, posthumanism, singularity, artificial intelligence, Klaus Schwab, Kurzweil, or Harari. They openly declare that is inevitable future of humanity. So we arrive to the historical terminal station that we finally, 5 centuries ago, we have embarked in this train, and now we are arriving at the last station.
So what he's saying here is that liberalism, meaning the classic liberalism where you're an individual, it's not collective, et cetera, he says the inevitable end is progressivism and then some dystopian future. But I don't think that's right. I'd love to hear from you. Liberalism doesn't lead to progressivism. Marxism leads to progressivism.
Yeah. The first half of the Dugin clip, I think, is correct. The second half is a massive equivocation. I think philosophically he should know better. I think he's doing some tactical rhetoric against the West in talking about the transgenderism. So let's take those two in part. So first part is fall of the Soviet Union. I think Dugin is exactly right that what played out in the 20th century left only some sort of liberalism standing in the field. The 20th century was a huge ideological battle. I think Dugin's analysis is correct. It's the kind of analysis I've argued and many other people have argued as well. The 20th century was about some sort of liberalism versus some sort of fascism or National Socialism versus some sort of Marxist communism. We fought world wars. We fought Cold Wars. We fought many trench warfare ideological wars as well. what happened was fascism was defeated, National Socialism was defeated, and by 1991, Marxist communism was defeated. And so what seemed to be almost inevitable, I don't want to use the inevitability language, but was that some sort of liberal democracy, capitalism, individualism, modernity was triumphant. So I think that part is exactly right. Now, where I think Dugin goes wrong is in the what happens next. My view is that what happened was that liberalism took a breather. We've been fighting wars, ideological and actual wars, for over a century. We let our guard down. We relaxed. We kind of thought everybody is going to get on board, and some sort of liberal, democratic, capitalist, modern future is slowly then going to prevail over the next generation. Now, what actually happened, though, was that the fascists, the National Socialists, the authoritarians, the communists, the Marxists of various sorts did not simply go away and give up the fight. Instead, they started to repackage themselves. And then inside the now triumphant West, there were counter movements that started to reassert themselves. And then we started to see then, by the time we get to 2010, 2015 or so, that those counter-Western movements inside the West are reasserting themselves, and everybody starts to become aware of them. And the particularly nasty forms of transgenderism, and I think there is a legitimate version of transgenderism that reasonable and sensitive people will take aware of, but weaponized transgenderism of the particularly violent form that we're sometimes dealing with, that is a different phenomenon. So the second part then is what Dugin wants to do is to say, and this is the part that you were picking up on, that the relativism, the angry activism, the willingness to let everything burn inside the West that we're now confronting with, the virulent forms of Islamism that we are now confronting, and so on, the total package of anti-Western, anti-liberalisms, where did those come from? Now, I agree, those are pathological, they are very destructive, but what Dugin is offering is a thesis that says that those anti-liberalisms are themselves an outgrowth of liberalism, and that, I think, is simply false.
So when he says, an end to modernity and liberalism, he's actually, one of the first things I found about Dugin that opened my eyes was his statement that that fascism with Mussolini, he says, was a very brave person, as was Hitler, but it didn't work. But they understood that international communism was not good. So they went for national communism or socialism, which became fascist. And he said where the two of them went wrong was they offered too many compromises. Exactly. He said the future, the future is fascism without compromise.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a little terrifying.
So this is 1990s Dugin, in the first decade after the fall of the Soviet Union. And he's a strange character right at this point. He's already adopted various forms of Nazism in the 1980s. And at this point, he's not a young man. He's in his late 20s. He's in his early 30s. So he's a mature thinker. He hates liberalism already. He hates modernity. He hates the West in its entirety. At the same time, he's dissatisfied with a lot of what's going on in the Soviet Union, its version of communism and Marxism. When the Soviet Union falls, though, he is co-founder of a national Bolshevik party. And the Bolsheviks, of course, were Lenin, Stalin, Trotsky, and so on. So it's a reworking of a kind of communist Marxism, but the nationalism is important there for him. And he then, within a few years, settles on saying what we need to do is just rework fascism. So he is widely and explicitly admiring of Mussolini, and some of the German fascists of the 1920s and early 1930s. And he publishes an article in 1997 called Fascism, Borderless, and Red. The red part means blood, and it means a little bit of incorporation of Marxism. That's going to be a bloody, violent revolution that we need. And the borderless part is also there, that we need to expand Russia's border. We need to be expansionist. What we need is a kind of national socialism. And he takes the socialism seriously, economic control. But it's not going to be a socialism where we take, so to speak, the Russian people and we make them fit into some abstract socialist template. This is the fascist part. We need to take the Russian people, its particular ethnic identity, including its religion, its cultures, its traditions, see it as having a world historical destiny. It's going to lead the world to a new, bright future that's not going to be trapped in the old Marxist way. And as you're suggesting, it's going to learn from the failures of the earlier versions of fascism
Correct.
and National Socialism. And what that is going to involve is a willing to be muscular, a willing to be violent, a willing to take ethnicity and nationalism seriously and not to compromise one jot with capitalism, with any form of Western liberalism. So yes, that's Dugin by the time we get to the late 1990s.